U.S. President Donald Trump is taking credit for a Mexican raid that killed the top drug lord. Mexico is dealing with the aftermath of a wave of cartel blockades and arson after an operation by its military killed the drug lord known as El Mencho on Sunday. But last night, at his State of the Union address, Trump centered the U.S. in the fight against the cartels.
For years, large swaths of territory in our region, including large parts of Mexico, really large parts of Mexico, have been controlled by murderous drug cartels. That's why I designated these cartels as foreign terrorist organizations. We've also taken down one of the most sinister cartel kingpins of all. You saw that yesterday.
Ya hemos explicado cuál fue la colaboración.
Today, Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum responded, confirming the U.S. provided intelligence, but saying the entire operation was carried out by Mexico. So even after killing El Mencho, is Mexico stuck between the cartels and the United States? Joining me now, Agustin Barrios Gómez is a former Mexican congressman. Thank you for doing this, sir. Really glad to get you on. We have seen in the aftermath of these raids, it has normalized. Everybody's gone slightly back to normal. I wonder, in the broader context, do you think the removal of someone like El Mencho was worth the day and a half, 2 days of chaos that it triggered?
Well, we have to be very precise with respect to what actually happened. So Mexico is a country of about 2 million square kilometers. By far, the majority of the territory wasn't affected. I was in Mexico City up until yesterday, and there was nothing going on there that was out of the ordinary. The parts of the country that were affected were basically the West, in particular the state of Jalisco, which includes, of course, Puerto Vallarta and Guadalajara. And basically that came down to vehicles being burned to block a few streets. There were no civilian bystanders hurt. And of course, much less were there any tourists hurt. So we just have to put that into perspective. So whether it was worth it or not, I think the actual cost is relatively small in terms of these vehicles being burnt, these streets being blocked. There wasn't generalized chaos, which is what we kind of saw in sensationalistic pictures that circulated on the internet. But in reality, that wasn't such a big deal. With respect to whether that is the correct strategy, that is up for grabs, of course, because the kingpin strategy of decapitating these organizations and then allowing the underlings to sort of fight amongst themselves for the next several months, that is, of course, in question. With respect to everyday security and certainly security for the 2 million Canadians that visit Mexico every year, that's not an issue. But in terms of the long-term impact of the strategy of decapitating these organizations and not actually, doing something more at the structural level in terms of the financing, in terms of the guns that are being run from the United States into Mexico that are being used by these cartels, I think that's the bigger question.
The former president, López Obrador, came under fire. The derision was he was into hugs, not bullets, in his approach to the cartels. Has Sheinbaum shown us that she's actually taking is this a real departure from that? Is she really, can we read into this that she's really engaging and willing to take on the cartels?
Yeah, I think that's very clear. Also, you have to understand that the person who is currently the Secretary of Security for the entire country, a gentleman by the name of Harfouche, he actually there was an attempt on his life when he was the head of Mexico City's police by this particular drug lord's teams, and so they tried to kill him. It must have been about 6 years ago. He saved himself from that, and so he is now being cited as being at the forefront of a much stronger policy against the drug lords. He is currently a little bit of a local hero in Mexico because he's seen as somebody who is taking a much tougher stance than the previous administration.
Mexico finds itself in a tough position with the United States really putting pressure on them. Is Sheinbaum's government sort of stuck between a rock and a hard place of the U.S. on one side and the cartels on the other?
In a way, she is, but at the same time, that it kind of ignores something that's very, very important. The general population in Mexico is also tired of these cartels doing what they do in certain parts of the country. And again, I have to be very specific. I mean, in terms of big cities and whatever, generally, like Mexico City is actually quite safe, as are the tourist destinations. But there are large parts of the country, especially in the countryside, where they do have to suffer these cartels and the cartel violence. And you saw a very telling poll that was run a couple of months ago that said that 60% of Mexicans would actually be in favor of direct U.S. military intervention if it meant doing away with the narcos. And she has to be so independent of whatever President Trump is saying. There is an outcry on behalf of the general population that says enough is enough, and she has to be very cognizant of that.
Is there a clear consensus on what doing away with the narcos would actually look like? Like, is that it's so embedded? It is they are so widespread. What would such an operation actually look like?
So, I mean, at the end of the day, Mexico's a country of about 130 million people. It's one of the 12th or 13th largest economy in the world, sixth most important tourist destination in the world. So there are resources, and it's a big and it's a strong country in many ways. And so when you actually look at the numbers behind these organizations, there are about 30,000 people working for El Mencho's CJNG organization, which is the cartel that this gentleman headed before he was killed. 30,000 people, finding them and putting them in jail is really not something that should be outside of the scope of Mexican government action with respect to taking them out. I think, it's a question of strengthening local police forces. It's a question of strengthening the Mexican military's capacity to take them on. It's a question of putting resources behind it and political will. So I do think that there is the possibility of that. In fact, at some point in my personal career, in my professional career, I was advisor to the Minister of Public Security of Mexico City. And we did several studies that showed that if there was political will, that you could actually weed out these organizations from the general society. It is something that can be done. But again, it's painful. It's difficult to do. And of course, with the amount of money that these people receive from consumers in the United States, then it is certainly very, very difficult. But can it be done? I do think that you can reduce the scale of the effect of these organizations, just like what was done in the United States when they took out the heads. They were able to deal with it at a local level because they put the resources behind it, and that's something that the Mexican government needs to decide to do. And I think it's time for it to decide to do so.
All right, we're going to have to leave it there. Former Mexican Congressman Agustin Barrios Gómez, thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you.